Lewis, I've been very much focused on facts and details of new discoveries in science, particularly cosmology or brain science, in order to discern what reality is. And I've been exposed to philosophy of religion and different theologies to look at non-physical or bigger world explanations. But at the end of the day, the question is epistemological. How do we, what kind of confidence do we have in our own capacity to know a lot of issues with this? But from your perspective, working in this science-religion interface, what can you say from your experience in working in science and theology that can reflect back on our capacity to know in either science or religion?
Yeah, I think the key word here, at least for me, I've been struggling with this for years, the key word here is evidence. Because, as you know, when scientific mentality started growing, of course, the methods of science started having a new source of evidence that came through observation, which was there before, but then we have experimentation and predictability of these observables, and so on. So evidence starts becoming very important. So knowledge based on evidence. Now, what is evidence? And this is a crucial question. And is evidence just limited to what we can see and touch? Even within science, this is a question, because of course we have instrument of extension of the senses. So in that sense, we have a broader range of evidence. However, I think the problems arise when this need for evidence, as we have in science, is extended over to religion, let's say, and theology. So evidentialism is a philosophical position according to which we should not accept anything that we cannot have evidence for ourselves. And therefore, somehow religious beliefs and affirmations are undermined in this way. The major problem with this kind of argument is that we forget other sources of epistemological justification. And one of the major sources is testimony. Even within science, you cannot have all the evidence yourself. Even if we're just talking about perceptual experience, we need to depend on other work in science and so on. So this idea of testimony is very important in theology. As you know, religious traditions contain their epistemological affirmations by resorting to testimony. And this is all in line with the whole idea of revelation. One interesting point which we need to consider here is what to do when we have counter-evidence. I'm talking here with an experiment, let's say, that falsifies a theory. And this was discussed at length. Some decades ago, it became quite sensational because people like Karl Popper and others were suggesting that, in fact, a scientific theory needs to be open to falsification.
And if it's not a scientific theory.
That's the major point.
Nothing can be ever proven right, but anything can be able to be proven wrong. That's science.
And that's kind of the hallmark of honesty in your inquiry. And of course, if you extend that towards religion or religious affirmations,
it fails the test.
It fails the test. And the usual conclusion there is that, therefore, religious belief and affirmation and theology in general is a kind of wishy-washy line of inquiry anyway, so it has to be sidelined or forgotten. Now, this kind of critique of the theological is somewhat naive. And in fact, in one of my research papers, I identified how even within the scientific community, the idea of having just one counter-evidence, one element of counter-evidence, dismantling a whole theory, that's something very naive. Karl Popper was the first one to argue in this way, but even his colleagues, Lakatos and others, started realizing that this kind of falsification is too naive. So we need to incorporate, even within science, the idea of holism. That means that within a theory, you have various affirmations that need other theories, and therefore when one element of counter-evidence hits a theory on one side, you can readjust the theory on other sides and keep what you said as intact. This has been studied at length within the philosophy of science. So my point is that this happens also in religion. Holism extends everywhere. So when a believer says, God loves me, for instance, and I'm convinced of this, and yet there is an element of counter-evidence, let's say a diagnosis of terminal cancer, and then you say, well, if he were an honest inquirer, that person should actually stop believing in God. However, I think the same dynamics that we saw on the scientific side should in fact apply there as well. And what does the religious believer do? Acknowledging a kind of effective link between himself and God, he could readjust his other affirmations and try to understand things differently in his life without abandoning that original affirmation that God loves him.
Yeah, so I appreciate how it makes sense that this holistic view can apply to science and religion, even though the tests in science and religion are vastly different, very much asymmetrical in terms of the way people assess truth. To be simple, science is third person. If I believe in something science, I should be able to prove it to you. But if I believe something that God loves me or I had a religious experience, I can tell you, but that doesn't prove it to you. So it's a big difference there. But you're saying the commonality is how robust each needs to be in terms of a holistic understanding of the theories, either in science or religion. So in that sense, you're saying they're very similar.
They are similar on that front.
On that one front.
Yes, but on other fronts, they are quite different, as you just mentioned. Right. Because in religion, I think affirmations are just a matter of, there is an affective link also with the affirmations we make.
And do the affective links and pressures, do they change the epistemology, the nature of the knowledge? Because affection or emotion kind of concerns me, because that can add a difference, that can be a distortion as well as a confirmation.
That's a good point. However, I think the problem arises because we think that the standard model of inquiry should be science. And then any kind of other inquiries or affirmations kind of miss out on the standards of science. We should remember that there are other modes that we can use as models. And to give you an example, suppose a couple are married and they love each other. Now, should one partner, as it were, require evidence every day that the other partner is in fact faithful? There's a whole different dynamics there. There is affective fidelity and trust. Now, these elements of life do not enter into science, natural science, but they do so in religion. So although we can learn from how inquiry in science occurs and proceeds, and we can learn from it within theology, we should never forget that theology may be distorted if we take science as the only model to refer to and forget simple, everyday human interpersonal interaction.